I got to be a kid from Belleville coming to this show as a director. I get to ride my bicycle down every day, lock it up, and go to work as a director on Star Trek. That was like mind-blowing.
Hi everyone, I'm Rose Lagacé, DGC Ontario production designer and president of the Canadian Production Design Association. I'm really excited to chat about Star Trek Discovery and the important role it occupies in Ontario's film and television production ecosystem. All of the creatives joining us in this conversation played a pivotal role in creating the incredible worlds we get to visit on the show. And we're pioneers on the VR and virtual production frontiers of Star Trek Discovery. I'm really looking forward to hearing how this group of artists worked together on this massive technological undertaking and how it's changed our industry here in Ontario. I'd love to go back to the beginning of the early days of Star Trek Discovery. I remember when I heard that Discovery was coming to Ontario and taking over the Pinewood stages. I want to get everyone's perspective, but Matt, could you kick us off and take us through how you came on board the show in those early pre-production days?
At the time that Star Trek rumors started to circulate, this would have been in 2016, there had already been this momentum in Toronto of larger and larger shows coming. We'd seen RoboCop and Crimson Peak and Total Recall. The crews were really starting to step up their game. I heard a rumor that Star Trek was going to be relaunching their franchise and the show to do it was going to be coming to Toronto. I dug some more and I found out that they had a production designer coming up from LA and that the supervising art director was actually someone known to me, and that was Todd Cherniowski. And he'd been up here to do a show with Vincenzo Natali called Splice, and Joshua DeCartier, Toronto art director and now concept artist, he'd been the art director at the time. So I called him right away. I'm like, Joshua, you got to call Todd. He's got Star Trek. So Joshua quickly sent out the word to people that he'd worked with and realized this was going to be a monumental undertaking to do this. So began to cast that a little wider and draw in some of the top talent in Toronto. We started to learn that it was going to be very big. It was going to take over all the available stages at Pinewood. There was concepting happening in LA. There was a team here in Canada that was doing concepting, and the set design started to build out. We split up the work into the major sets, and set designers were assigned. But it was essentially a standard show that had been, the production methodology of building out big stage sets. Anything that's beyond that, you've got green screen. We are going to be doing location work, a standard template of approaching one of these bigger shows. But the first time a series of this scale was really being mounted with this sort of infrastructure and built sets. And also, it's Star Trek. Just about anyone who's in the art department, you're dying to work on these sets and actually contribute to something that has such a lasting legacy.
Do you remember the code name for our show back then? Green Harvest.
Green Harvest.
We couldn't tell anybody what we were working on, so they were like, let's call it Green Harvest. These guys were particularly into weed at the time, and they were like, let's just call it Green Harvest, and nobody will know what they're talking about.
Brian Fuller had spent, I think it was around a decade, pushing hard to create this show and revive the whole Star Trek franchise.
And Brian Fuller had done Hannibal. He championed us. He championed Byrne.
Yes.
Which was like a real coup.
He'd met the crews. He met yourself, Chris, and other key members of the production environment up here. Made the case that Toronto was a great place to be for a show of that scale. And that's where it landed.
I think American Gods was a factor as well. I think he was working on that in town. So they just put Star Trek in the same backyard.
It was back and forth at the time, if I remember, between Chicago and Toronto. LA was a bit nervous until people stood up for us, and Brian was one of those people who said, look, I've done Hannibal, I've done American Gods. Once that was said and it started to roll, nobody questioned it. It was an amazing time to be supported like that by people who had come here and done successful shows.
I know Discovery really tried to push the envelope when it came to the art department and visual effects, and very early on, you tried to adopt technology like VR goggles for set walkthroughs. Could you guys speak to that experience? What led you further down the trajectory of exploring more and more technological advancements on the show, and how did it change how you typically do your jobs?
Well, that was kind of the beginning, where in one of the sets that we had designed for my first episode, like, I got to be a kid from Belleville coming to this show as a director. I get to ride my bicycle down every day, lock it up, and go to work as a director on Star Trek. First of all, that was like mind-blowing. Being able to bring our hobbies and our innovation into things like VR technology to bring it to work was a fascinating evolution. The ability to build sets, Matt would build sets inside SketchUp or whatever programs you were using. We were able to, as a director, put on our headsets and look around inside a set in progress, a room that is full of three-dimensional objects you can move around. At one point, I realized the room is backwards. And if this was a built set and you go, oh my God, I imagined it wrong, it would be like way behind. In this thing, it was like, come back in a couple of hours. You have a viewfinder. You can bring it up, you can look around and preview and go, this is it, build this. Take the headset off. Weeks later, walk into the place in progress, and it's astonishing to be able to, have that kind of preview. And we were early adopters of that. It felt like a real team effort, and that we were sort of like hot wiring the process with these things that were all just coming out at the time.
Just prior to joining the Star Trek team, I'd been working on another space show, The Expanse. One of the set designers on that show was just starting to experiment and try out. He picked up an HTC Vive, and he'd taken a look at one of the sets that they were working on, and I tried it out. I thought, this is amazing. So once I was on Star Trek, we realized that the utmost benefit of seeing these sets before you actually go onto them would be of great use to directors, lighting, the blocking, the set decorators, so you understand how the set's being shot. So I went out, I bought one. Once we did some internal testing to make sure it was actually working, I mean, it was phenomenal. You could move around, you could look under desks inside the digital set, look behind walls, check it all out. Our set designers, of course, are working 3D software already and are able to navigate around and see different views and see the model that way, but to actually put it on and have that experience with immersion in the set that is just a model at that point was mind-blowing. And as each director came on, we'd set up a little time slot for them, and they'd come in, and we'd have a chair in the middle of the room and this headset on it, and they'd have this sort of nervous look, and they'd come in and try it on, and we'd have to, okay, what you're going to see, it might be disorienting because there was all these warnings. You might vomit, you might walk into a wall or like trip on something. And we're like, okay, there's like liability here, because it was so new that people were having these horrible experiences trying VR. We didn't want that with our directors, but we had to take the chance. So they'd come in, try it out. And then once they got used to it, then we started allowing them to use a little button that they could teleport them within the model, and they could move around, or they could use little walk tools and check things out. And a little further along, they could take a snapshot. Suddenly, they can do a rough blocking.
Storyboards.
And all these tools, it was like technology that within the Star Trek world, it was feeling like we were starting to live the promise that show had made, that we were actually living in it. And then it became more and more apparent as the season went on, and as the art departments really wrapped their head around being in the Star Trek world, that we could advance technology and use that technology to create this vision that also talks about futuristic technology. It was like a world within a world, history repeating kind of moment. All this technology was first shown to mass audiences on Star Trek. Tricorders and comms badges, it all became this pocket technology now that we live with and take for granted.
Lee, you use it, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. I was about to say, like, it's nice when the technology can step in and actually help you fight those creative battles. Like I use a VR headset too sometimes particularly if I'm sculpting something organic, because I've tried computer sculpting programs in the past. And there was always kind of a bit of a disconnect, whereas when you have the headset on and you're actually manipulating things with your hands, it's like way easier to do for me personally. So it also helps, like I say, fight those creative battles, because you can, everybody's different. Like you could have a director that's not particularly visual, or like some people you can show them just a flat image or a sketch, like a thumbnail sketch, and they can extrapolate to what it would look like. But other people are different. They might not necessarily be able to extrapolate like that. So being able to show them something that moves or animates can really sort of help you out when you're trying to explain an idea. Like there was one time I was working on a set for Star Trek, and we had to have these huge egg casings, and these things were like a kilometer high or something. So they were massive and they wanted big scope. I sculpted the thing in VR, and I did a recording of myself at human scale walking underneath this giant egg casing in VR and looking up and seeing that kind of vantage point. And when they showed that to the director, then straight away the director was like, yeah, this could really be cool. So it's nice to have technology help you out that way.
That was in the 403 inside the moon, and I just watched that episode. And I watched when we go like, where's the dilithium? It's like, it's up there. And it's such a great shot. It was like impossible scope and scale. Yeah, that was like the very
And it's things like that typically, like with concept art, we're working in flat images, and that's fine for like 80% of things. But that extra 20%, when it's things like that, when the whole idea you're trying to sell is scope and scale and what a human being would see if they looked up at those things, it's where it's very useful to have things like VR.
Mike, what do you use for your set design?
Well, I've been moving into Blender quite a bit, but mainly for the drawings of the sets, it's Rhino 3D. Right. I think that Star Trek pretty much went almost exclusively Rhino, over the course of the seasons.
When we went to the AR wall, when all that started, there was one, it's funny now, but it was like mind-bending. And Doug, you remember when we were going back and forth between building things in the AR with measurements and then going into Rhino. So you'd go from Unreal to Rhino, practical things and furniture and builds, and then you'd try to scale the two together and be like, oh, and here we go. And it turned out after like 2 days, one was in metric and the other one was imperial. So it was like this, it was never going to match. And I was like, what is happening? And it's literally a button in your preferences to flip it over. On the learning curve, that was a pretty funny one.
Stonehenge.
Drove me crazy. Stonehenge. That's what it became.
The scale thing is really fun in all this because, like Lee was saying, and you too, Chris, like you could do massive, enormous, or super tiny.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting to do that.
It was just full on experiment, throw everything at everything to see what was working. And sometimes just one camera, like we are a 2-camera or a 3-camera show to get the show done. And it's like, okay, 1 camera today. Tracker's not working. It was so fun.
Oh, that's right. I remember that. Yeah. Especially early. I think later we got into 2 cameras and 3 cameras. But
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But we were the very first. That wall was like assembled and just in time for us to hit it.
I got to say, though, my favorite thing about the VR, when we had the room set up in Dan's office, all the directors would go into Dan's office and their minds would be blown. And
Totally.
But all the directors thought that Dan designed everything.
It's true. Wow, how did you did all of this?
Genius.
Yeah.
Great job, Dan. Great job.
It's funny how the human brain works, though, because even for me, like having used 3D programs for years, I know what it's like to actually be inside a 3D model of a set or something and be looking around with a virtual camera. As soon as you put that thing on your head, and your own head movements are actually looking around the room, you can sense how far away things are. and you can manipulate it. It's such a different experience, and it's so much more immediate.
So Doug, as the production designer, how did it affect your design process on the show? What changed for you as a result of working with VR?
I have to back up a little bit, because the way we work on Star Trek is we do old-fashioned 2D drawings first. I remember talking to production designers one time about this, and it seemed so scary to the who someone is, and scary to me too when we first started. But there's at my level where I'm interacting with the showrunners and the directors and talking about concepts, and then taking that information and working with the concept artists and the set designers and the art directors. Like, I remember Carol Spear telling me it's one step at a time. Everything is one step at a time, right? So, you start with these sketches, even pencil sketches sometimes. You build and build and build and build, and it goes to 3D. It would be rough 3D at first, and then it would be more complex 3D. And our team, their extraordinarily talented team, would bring it to really far. And then it would go to a company, a third party, which would texturize it and kind of make it look photorealistic. And I was involved literally from, like I say, from the pencil drawing all the way to the 3D model. And I would move around with the concept artists and the executive producers and stuff. And we would look at all this stuff. And like Lee and Mike were saying, you can move around and kind of move things towards you and closer. And so we often had these meetings with the directors and the DPs, and we would literally, like set dressing, like they're blocking, and we would move like a rock, or we'd move like an alien thing. We would just move it around within, and sometimes live, which was really wild. Sometimes we would take away that information to do it later, but it was very cool, especially in season 5. We did it live a lot. We would just pick up the 3D fake digital thing and move it to wherever the DP and the director wanted it to be. It was very cool.
At what point did you all start experimenting with virtual production? And was that season 4?
It was for season 4. So in season 1, it was a very intensive process to get this series of sound stages set up with all the standing sets required. We had bridges for ships, we had corridors, sick bay, we had a massive sarcophagus ship, which was featuring our Klingons. This was an enormous effort to be mounted. There was a team of about 35 members of the art department here in Toronto. There was about 500 carpenters working to get all these sets up. It was a big deal. About midway through the season, Todd Cherniowski, he'd been away from LA for a year, and he decided to return. And Tamara Deverell, the Toronto designer, she picked up the show from there and led the art department through the paces to get that season completed. And it was fast paced at that time. And that pace continued into the second season. At the end of season 2, Tunde and Frank and the executives started to toss around the idea of how to get it more scopy, because Alex Kurtzman was wanting the show to have more scope beyond the sets that they were starting to see. They wanted to make it bigger, Star Trek big. But we started to experiment with how can we do some new things. There was some interesting testing happening at the time on the Pinewood lot with the Sheridan Institute of Research and Technology, CERT. And there was a guy there named Josh Karakes. He was showcasing this new technology with an LED wall and a camera, and they had all these tracking cameras around and on a grid frame, on a truss over top of an area. It was maybe like 30 by 30 or 40 by 40, just a little room, a little space set up in the stage. And they were trying motion capture, and they were doing all these tests. He'd been working in LED technology, these screens, tracked cameras, and he showed us this demo, and we all came over from the Star Trek art department, and we checked it out, and it was pretty amazing. It was crude, but the potential for it was there. You could see the first step. And we raved about it to Frank and to Ted, and they decided that they were going to have a test done on the set. They had one of these LED screens brought over, set outside the window where normally we'd have a green screen to show the space beyond, or comp in a ship. You have a starbase or something out there. Instead, we were looking at 2 stand-ins. The camera was seeing them looking out the window, and then it was an alien landscape with all this desert sand and these rocky formations. They moved the camera back and forth, and it felt like suddenly the airlock is, landed on the planet, on the surface of a planet. But the camera crew, they wanted to make sure that if they're going to get saddled with this technology, it's got to work. So they did some quick dolly moves, some whip pans, rack focus, and you could see, the moire effect on it. So it's limiting there. When they whip pan, the refresh rate, it couldn't catch up. And they broke it so many ways that they were like, this is interesting, inspiring, sure, but it's not going to work. I mean, we need something, if we're going to take away our green screen, you can't shoot a whole day with your actors and end up with something that has to get rotoscope. It was looking, okay, we tried it. Sometime in the future, this is going to happen. 6 months later, the word comes down. This is happening. Toronto's getting this LED stage that we'd all just seen drop on The Mandalorian. It had dropped in November 2019, and now we're getting into the start of 2020 and the pandemic, and all of a sudden you had all these forces in the universe culminating in, we got to make work remote, we got to use distancing, we got to limit the number of people going out to these locations and travel, and there's travel restrictions, and it became that galvanizing moment for taking the proven technology from The Mandalorian and launching it out into the world. And the people at Pixel and Tunde and Frank and Alex Kurtzman, they all got on board with the idea of using LED stage production to create the show and do something new and groundbreaking for Star Trek.
Chris, as a director, were you involved on the ground floor in those conversations?
No, I'm always been a visiting director. I was on the pilot for the very beginning, way back in 2016, but I've always had a visiting role on the show. So I come and go. Tunde was really the one who led it as the producing director. I'm always like the dirty rag that you light on fire and jam into dark corners of the film business, it would seem. I get the missions of, why don't you go and be the first director to go and do it? So I was their experimental guinea pig director to go and do it, which I was honored to be because it felt like it was out of respect.
You nailed it, Chris.
Yeah, we all nailed it. I mean, we all got nailed by it, I think, in the process. Lee and Mike, everyone gets dragged in because the thing about virtual art department, the VAD, as it's now called, it was the integration, bringing what is normally pre-production and post-production, we're bringing them into production, right? So we're involving all these people that are normally on the outside of the two brackets of a shoot day are now integrated right into it. And it was a learning curve. I mean, we can all say The Mandalorian did it, which they did, but you have to go through the process yourself to discover all of the nuances that come along with the process.
So when you did finally start using virtual production on Discovery, what did you find were the biggest learning curves and challenges for you and your teams?
In summer 2020, there was a second Star Trek show starting up in Toronto, and that was going to be Strange New Worlds. So there would be a whole new set of stages. We had an incredible crew after 3 seasons, and now it was going to split into 2 separate units, and one was going to head up to get that show started, and the other one would continue on with Discovery. I was tapped to go up to join Jonathan Lee on Strange New Worlds, but I got a call from Frank, and he said that there was going to be a quick shuffle of some of the chess pieces, and I'm going to need you down at Star Trek Discovery. We've got this new virtual production thing happening, and would you join that? And the first question, when do we have to have this ready? When are we doing this? Is this like this season, later this season, by the end of the season? And it was by January. And at this time, it was September, end of August, September, the decision, we're going to shoot in January. At that point, there wasn't a stage for it. Stage space was at a premium, and we had to start looking for a stage to do this in, and the clock's ticking. So the location manager went out and started scouting warehouses all in the fringes of Toronto. He found one, and it was a former metal foundry that had been decommissioned up in Brampton, and This was around middle of October. The designs are being produced, scenery is being prototyped. We still don't have a stage. We don't know if our team can make it work, how this is all going to come together. And just seeing it the very first time with some of the ideas that we had. Here's a model of the set. Here's what the floor you might put on it. But terrifying, because now it's almost 2 months from when the stage is supposed to be up. Tops 3 till when we're actually shooting there with the crew. The set's got to be perfect. So Jody, who is the supervising art director before I came on in season 3, she and I had both worked with Todd Cherniowski. He had experience in The Mandalorian. So luckily we had that phone a friend option. We asked him, like, what are some of the pitfalls? Is it what we've seen in some of these promo reels? Like, you build the thing, you put it up, it's magic. And he said, it's not quite like that. It's been a lot of R&D and a lot of trial and error. So we learned things like you have to have a riser inside this horseshoe-shaped set because you have to create separation between your practical setting and the display of that on the wall, because that's digital pixels illuminating and creating a bit of a glow. And then you have physical elements that are being lit and reflecting light. And those two things are functioning very different. And to get them to match perfectly, you got to create a bit of space there. And you have to have your set a little higher so that you're blocking out that joint between the stage floor and the wall. Some of these key paradigm pointers we gathered from him, but then we had to actually get it done and figure it out for our spec. So we pretty much maxed out the specification for our LED wall within the set we had. It ended up landing at 70 feet wide, 82 feet deep, and 23 feet high. Technical floor at the bottom, the wall surrounds, and above that, you've got an LED ceiling as well, and all the elaborate rigging and electrical for additional film lights to go in there. They pop a panel out, put in a film light, and then you have the ability to light for different scenarios or hang scenery. The big challenge for me was wrapping my head around what our teams needed to do in order to hit that major milestone at the end of January. And I was working out all the intricacies of that by having intense meetings with the department heads, with the set designers, with the set deck team. Because it was the pandemic, we'd have these Zoom chats and we'd have like a Zoom roundtable with 20 people on it. And we'd look at the drawings. We'd have the set designer show us the model of what we were planning to put on the stage. Then we'd talk it through and we'd find the problems. We had a very good relationship. Everyone was very candid by this point after 3 seasons. They'd call it out. They'd say exactly how are these set pieces moving in one day. You're talking 10 trucks. There's practical considerations. How are you going to control these lights? Who's going to do that? It was because we had that shorthand from 3 seasons of working together and just a driving passion that when these very dramatic concepts that Doug was putting together with Tunde and Michelle were being presented to the crews, they could see that these are amazing. These are groundbreaking. We haven't done anything like this, but we know how to solve problems. We can do this and we are going to do this. And it's just solving one problem at a time until we get there.
And Chris, on the floor, what's it like for you to work and direct in this way?
I had always kind of dreamed of working this way in the problem solving of it all on another Toronto production. I was working with Unreal Engine, the idea of it, using motion, trees and forests and wind for the Red Forest for 12 Monkeys, just as an experiment, as a way to solve a problem. So I was always hoping that this was going to be something that could work. By the time we got to Star Trek and it was like, oh my God, this is real. And Unreal Engine was the thing that I was using then. And now it's actually happening. It became like a personal, like, dream come true. The thing that I learned is that everyone sees the problems differently from their own department. It's just like a very unique location. You need to consider where you're going to put the camera, because if you can't put the camera somewhere where the trackers can see the camera, it doesn't work. So everyone collectively gets on board with everybody else's needs. So you grow this new way of working together.
Doug, what was the learning curve like for you as a production designer and just continuously scaling up in terms of the visual scope?
It was a massive learning curve because I'd come from shows that were just, contemporary American design stuff. Here I was in this show where they were using this technology and there was a desire to make it huge and scopy. Normally, as a production designer, you have to kind of balance the budget and the look, and you kind of have to balance all these things. But they were really interested. So my role is a little bit different from Matt's in that working with Michelle and Tunde was to go big, like massive big. Like by season 5, we were making virtual worlds that were 10 kilometers. They told us it was the biggest digital worlds they'd ever created. We just kept getting bigger and bigger and crazier and crazier. And there was no holding back because, you're not doing anything in the real world, right? So if Lee and Mike are building a digital model of something, we would say, make it 10 times bigger and add 5,000 more things, because you don't normally do that in the real world, right? And we really learned a whole bunch of tricks. Like we would duplicate things and change the sizes and the texture and the color. It would be the same thing because, it was really complicated in terms of like every single object is a thing, right? And if I could back up for a second, what was really interesting about this, and we haven't really talked about this, is so the way most of these shows done is green screen. So, characters act in front of a green screen and then they replace what the green screen with the content. So the way it works is it's per shot. So what was super exciting for the directors and the DPs and the executives was that all of a sudden the directors could really do whatever they wanted. They could move all around, look anywhere they want to. And it was not by shot anymore. It was all the money was up front, like Chris was saying, post-production came into production and we would build these worlds. And then, the directors I kept saying to them, do whatever you want. Like just, that's what I was saying. So the directors were interesting too, because sometimes they were really super techie and sometimes they weren't. So the old school directors who weren't really techie, they just had to find, they were doing blocking and tone and interesting things. And it was really exciting for them. And even if they didn't participate in any of the technical stuff, they were just so excited because, it wasn't limiting. You could just do these crazy, fascinating, and original shots. And like I said, by the end of season 5, our imagination and creativity with the art directors, the set designers, the concept artists, the motion graphics, the graphics, everything was so big. Like nothing scared us, and we just went massive. And we would make complicated, intricate, creative things because we knew we could do it. And we became fearless. We became more and more creatively fearless as we went through, the emotions. Like I say, by 5, we were kind of on fire, right? It was very, very scary at first because literally, I'm not kidding here, no one knew how to do it. So we were all learning at the same time, all the different levels, from the grips, the electrics, everybody, all the way to the executives. Like nobody knew how to do any of it. So collectively, we generously helped each other it was really a nice spirit, like Chris was saying, and Matt, that we really all helped each other figure this out. And it was like Matt said, having this crew that had been together for a long time was really helpful. And then you had these geniuses like people like Lee and Mike who were behind the scenes, just being explosively imaginative. And it was very exciting. And, it got us out of the green screen world.
So Lee, in terms of your learning curve, what was it like for you now to have to work on such a grand scale?
Well, I mean, for me, I'm kind of lucky in that I don't have to deal with the logistics and the kind of reality side of things that some of the other people on this panel have to deal with. So I get to kind of just sit my computer and come up with whatever. I'd always worked in 3D. Like I've been in this industry. I started as a concept artist in like 2015 or 2016. So that was right around the time that concept art as a whole was getting into the 3D land. And if you were going to be an artist, the consensus was you kind of needed to learn 3D because it's such a useful thing. So I'd always use that. And I was kind of well versed in using 3D by the time we started on season 4. So that was really helpful in that, like with the AR wall, you kind of have to keep in mind that everything is going to be seen from more or less a human perspective. So there's not going to be aerial shots and stuff. And designing with that perspective in mind was definitely something that I tried to keep in mind. And 3D just made it easier to do that because you can import the exact dimensions of the AR wall. You can scale things as needed and you can move things around while you're keeping that vantage point. So there was things to keep in mind. Like Matt mentioned, a lot of the times with the AR wall, you want to cover the seams, so you have to have some kind of a ramp at the bottom that covers that transition, and just keeping that in mind when I was designing.
Did you feel you were able, even in the concept phase, to play a bit more, to go further?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, because you're not limited to things like a specific location, specific time of day. You can make all those decisions, and you can make the choices that serve the story best and what the requirements of the director and the showrunners are and stuff. So it's definitely freeing. It's a little bit scary too, because sometimes it's nice to have limitations and to be able to kind of figure out what box you're in. It was quite freeing not to have to kind of worry about some of those physical limitations that you would normally get on designs for these shows.
Were you designing in Unreal?
So I've dabbled a little bit in Unreal. I haven't kind of gotten to grips with it to an extent where I could use it professionally yet. The nice thing about Blender, which is the 3D program I use, is that it has its own real-time rendering engine. It's kind of like a slightly less sophisticated version of Unreal. But that in itself, even just having access to that, because I used to use a different 3D program that didn't have real-time rendering. So every time you rendered an image and you wanted to add color and materials and stuff, you had to sit and wait for like 5 minutes. And, and these productions are deadlines. They're kind of like that. Like we have to turn stuff around a couple of hours. So anything that can give you an instant read and that you can design without having to stop and wait for some technical thing to complete, that's a game changer. And moving into Blender itself completely changed the way I work, and you can think a lot freer when you don't have to sit and wait on a program to finish rendering. Yeah, and the fact that it's free too. I mean, Unreal Engine 2 started off as a free program, and anything for me that removes that barrier to entry I think is great, because it allows people like us to practice our craft and get a lot better without having to have that kind of barrier to entry of like a huge subscription or things like that. You can just practice and get better at things that way.
Isn't it incredible that Blender and Unreal, they're both free software?
Yeah. I hope it never changes. I lie awake at night worrying that Blender is someday not going to be free, because it's such a great program.
And Mike, were you already using Blender at the time that you started using virtual production, or what was your learning curves on with the virtual production volume?
I ended up making the switch largely because of what Lee just said, that there's a built-in game engine. To be able to design and seeing how light falls on a design on a 3D volume is incredibly informative. Working in Rhino has like a kind of like fake volume, kind of like live render, which has very little to do with like how a real light works. To be able to design this way was just incredible. There's so many things that you just don't need to include in builds and whatnot, because the light never hits there, or you want to build things out so the light catches, you have a bit more interest and whatnot. So the Blender transition was amazing. I was using a different software package, and it's whoever's thinking about it, it's totally worth the switch. Just Eevee alone, just to be able to see live renders, it's incredible. I am a set designer, but I kind of have my foot in both worlds. I dabble in the concept world as well. What was amazing about this step into virtual production was that as a set designer, you're really bounded by budget and time. What's possible in build time and what they're willing to pay for it. This is often limiting, and you got to be really crafty and creative with where you put your emphasis, creative emphasis. But once you've opened up, the virtual wall, you can actually design stuff that's out there in space, and you're completely unlimited by budget or space or anything. So you can just get wildly creative, get really scopy with it. And that's the kind of like the big difference. So you can design this virtual space, and that really informs the practical builds, right? Because the practical builds that are bounded by these restrictions that I mentioned, of just like time and money. So the interaction between the two, I mean, it's just a completely different way of working. This bouncing between the virtual and the real is like just amazing. And like the interplay is incredible. It's just a real playground.
Virtual production always includes, the way we did it anyways, a real life set with a real floor. And one of the challenges, it's a huge part of it, is to match and blend this real set with what's happening on the AR wall. So that's why like what Lee and Mike were doing was really important in 3D, because sometimes we would choose what we would build based on the concept of in the 3D, because, let's say if you're standing on a desert with a rock, and the actor's walking by the rock, so the ground would be sand and there'd be a rock there, and they would walk past a real rock, but maybe in the distance you'd see lots more rocks that would be photographed. Sometimes we photograph that fake rock and put that rock through the desert in the air, and a sunset or something like that. Virtual production has a real world component that needs set dressing, it needs carpenters and painters, and it needs graphers and grips and electrics. It needs real people doing real things like a regular TV show, movie, whatever. And then there's this other component where this massive backdrop, which is this huge TV, is another layer. So Mike's role, for instance, where he would draw like old-fashioned drawings that carpenters had to build from, is certainly part of virtual production.
You guys bring up a really great point in terms of turnarounds. When you're dealing with the volume wall and how elaborate that setup is, how does that affect the logistics and the details of your turnaround time? Did that process eventually become easier as the seasons went on?
Well, there's two parts to that. There's my role in it, and the concept, which is a whole other. We're in a fake world, like we're not really grounded in reality at all. But then people like Matt and the art directors and everybody else had to really make this happen somehow. So there was sometimes the set designers had to work in the design, like put it on rolling things or whatever, like roll these huge things in. And you'd have half a day to kind of put these extremely elaborate sets together. Like Stranger World is wild things. Like they roll these enormous sets into the volume, and it's all has to be coordinated by 1 million human beings.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a big conveyor belt.
The design is catering to like very complex logistics, right? And the design has to involve, how you break down the larger pieces. Like the set has to come apart in pieces so that it can be loaded onto like, semis or like just large trucks and actually flown into the space, and it has to be like evacuated very quickly. And you kind of design to that with, the guidance of like a very sophisticated carpentry shop and scenic shop. It really was a really well-oiled machine by season 4 and 5 that we had really learned how to work well together. And the entire operation did get rather sophisticated. They could handle this evolution in the production.
And don't forget our showrunner, Michelle Paradise, and Alex Kurtzman, and Tunde, all the Tunde, Osun Samni, they were pushing us to be as imaginative, creative, massive, scopy, and big as we possibly could. So it was really this whole balancing act of that with all this logistics. And, it was very challenging. And we didn't really talk about it, but there's a whole component of lighting this thing and, testing it and making sure it works well together. And that's really complicated, and it involves very sophisticated technicians and artists. That was a really important learning curve to figure out how to do that quickly.
Chris, can you tell me more about your experience working with the volume, directing your first virtual production episode in season 4?
I was asked to do the 403, which was the third episode in season 4, which was going to be partially shot with 3 individual sets on the brand new wall that had been built for Star Trek. While the art department sets were going to be in episodes 1 and 2, it just was a schedule function that I became the first director to put it up there, even though I was the third episode. So I had to watch all of the testing get done for Tunde, who was the producing director. Basically, all of their sets would get put in. They would do lighting blends, and I would be off to the side waiting, developing my relationships with the people that run the consoles, the people that are designing the assets. And then it came down to the wire of like, they kept testing and they kept testing. It's like, when do we get to test? Because we're the first ones up. So it was a really nerve-wracking time to finally get the testing for what was coming up after we shot, and then we got put in. So there was a little bit of nerves on top of nerves getting it going, because the pressure was for everyone to work together and to get it done. It was interesting because in the past, prior to the AR wall, we would work with Lee and you'd have the concept designed that would be for the end of the show, right? So you could shoot everything on green screen, and then you knew that what Lee was going to make was going to be put in later in visual effects. Developing it all beforehand was a new process to work together to get all of the assets that you want and put it in and then bring it to production. So having the elements of the story and the scenes that are being developed to visit as a location wasn't the only thing we had to do. So at the same time, we still have to do tech surveys of all the sets that we're shooting in the ship. All the rest of the story has to keep going. So really what this is doing is introducing a whole other location to what is normally just a studio show that we're shooting at Pinewood. So rather than just being inside our normal stages in one place, we're driving up to Brampton to do lighting tests. We're going there to do blend tests, color, camera, tracking. It was a really exciting, and again, I'm going to say nerve-wracking experience because it was working, but barely. But it just became a team effort of building on top of everyone's enthusiasm for what we were doing.
What was your experience working with Tunde?
The way it worked is Michelle Paradise was our showrunner with Alice Kurtzman. They were the two key showrunners, and they had a whole bunch of writers that would write the episodes. So we would get these sort of story versions, like sentences, not scripts, and they would very early, like 20 weeks out. And we would talk a little bit about the concepts, and we would do old school art department visual research. We would look for very bugs and textures and beautiful skies and interesting trees and all sorts of things. And we would start to build up the world that they were looking for. So that was how it started, really old school, just looking, go to the library, finding interesting, beautiful images and kind of build this thing up. So Michelle had a vision for the whole season, and so did Alex. We had to work so far ahead because all this is so expensive and so time consuming. So we really had to develop all the creative ideas way, way more ahead of time than normal shows, like than normal contemporary American, stuff like live action stuff. So we were way ahead, and that was a learning here for them too, because you have to commit really early to your creative ideas because you can't really change them later. You can a little bit, you can tweak, but you can't major change things. Michelle is an amazing writer and full of fabulous ideas, and it was really important to me and to Tunde that we always maintain the integrity of her ideas. So Tunde is a brilliant storyteller, director, artist, and he is very respectful of the creative process and respectful of everybody creatively. I worked a lot closely with him, and then we would bring it to the concept artists and the set designers and the art directors, and we would develop whatever concept. And there was millions of them. So that's why there was such a massive team. So we would be working on episode 1 with, 5 people, and then there'd be another 5 people working on episode 2 and whatever. It was this really big, complicated, millions of meetings just going through it. And then eventually the directors came involved as well. And we would start to loop them in as early as we could, and adapting some of the ideas for their storytelling, the way they wanted to tell the story. We always want to incorporate that part of it. Within the DGC, the learning curve of the art department generally and broadly, the set designers, concept artists, motion graphics designer, the graphic designers, the learning curve and the creativity and the skills and the knowing how to do things in a really cool way really got super developed. That's why I think Toronto, you could handle a huge, complicated show like this, and even more coming. Like, it's ready. We've learned how to do this, and we have the talent here to make this happen. A show like this, because of the experience we had with Star Trek Discovery, for sure. But we really built up this industry, and it was really a collective experience. It was the IA people, the DGC directors, and everybody else. So we collectively brought this whole thing together and made this whole thing happen.
Something about the environment that actually just wanted you to always get better and better all the time. Like, everyone around me now is like such a tier A professional that it keeps you on your best game at all times, and everyone does actually help each other quite a bit, and there is a spirit of mentorship which is alive and well in the art department. Every day is a privilege to go to work.
I definitely wouldn't be working on this show if it wasn't for people online being so kind of open and sharing their knowledge. I mean, I studied to be an engineer, and when I moved to Toronto, then I decided to try and become a concept artist, and there's such a wealth of information online from people just sharing tutorials for free on YouTube and stuff, and that was basically how I learned most of what I know. But then you're absolutely right that like everybody on the team, they all have that same mindset, and everybody's paying it forward because somebody else was kind enough to share some trade secret that they had with them or some technical kind of skill. I mean, on the 2 Discovery seasons that I was on, we had a channel on Zoom that was just dedicated to everybody just sharing technical tricks that they were learning with these different softwares like Blender and Unreal Engine. It's definitely a positive thing when everyone's just willing to kind of share their secrets instead of just keeping things to themselves, because nobody gets better that way.
An apprentice, a trainee, could start with the crew and be welcomed into the existing fold of the art department. They might be coming out of an interior design program or industrial design or even, theater or an art program, but they quickly saw around them the fine work that was being done. And it was such a generous, sharing group of people that they could pop over and ask a question, get shown how to do something. And then people that were starting as a trainee in one season, by the next season, they'd elevated to being a second. By the next season, they were taking on small set pieces and progressing from there. And it's that sense of bringing people up and growing a group of peers and this large film family that really makes Toronto an excellent place to shoot in, because after different shows wrap, people move over to another show and another show, but they're still connected and they're sharing insights on how to do things better, software tricks, staging techniques. They might have found a new location and used it on a show, and then they mention that, and then that becomes another resource the shows can use in their own way. And this spirit that we have here in Toronto and all through Ontario, it's like a rising tide is going to float all boats, and everyone feels that way, that they want to make this industry better because there's space for us all to grow and to work on these fantastic projects.
Thanks so much, everyone. This has been incredible. It's so exciting to see how visual effects opportunities have scaled up in Ontario and how these massive productions are trusting our Ontario crews to create amazing things with this innovative technology. I'm really looking forward to seeing all of your incredible work on season 5 of Discovery. You all should be so proud. Thank you again to director Christopher Byrne, production designer Doug McCullough, supervising art director Matt Middleton, concept artist Lee Fitzgerald, and set designer Mike Stanek for joining me today. Thank you.
Thanks, Rose.
Thanks a lot, Rose. This is great.
Thanks for having us.